Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Saturday Morning Podcast with Tarot Astronova. I'm your host, and I am here with Mark Harris today. And Mark Harris is going to talk to us about a little bit about Uranian astrology. So, good evening, Mark. Glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, and I'm very, very glad that you've invited me. It's an honor to be here. Uranian astrology is a development of astrology that occurred in the early part of the 1900s with the Hamburg School of Astrology in Germany. Among the famous people that were involved with the Hamburg School were Alfred Witt and Frederick Sigrun, both of who were fantastic astrologers. One of the things that led to the Uranian approach, which is much more detailed than some aspects of traditional astrology, is that Alfred Witt served in the military in Germany during World War One as an astrologer. He was very much interested in developing a way to time Russian shelling of German positions on the Eastern Front uh, with astrology to specific German locations. He was unable to do that with traditional astrology, so he began to traditional astrology that had been incorporated from the Arabic tradition. I believe that astrology is based on the universe being organized by a fractal mathematical structure, and that astrology is a relationship between the bodies and points in surrounding space around our world with what goes on down here as a mutual relationship of fractal grammars. That is a chaos science term, and it seems to fit how astrology reflects us and we reflect astrology.
As above, so below, huh?
Yes, the same concept in a definition from an established science. And I believe that's very important that we're reaching that place where we can come up with something in the scientific and academic literature that verifies what we've been seeing for 5,000 years. I
Yes.
think that's crucially important that we have arrived at that point and will help us to further develop astrology so that it can be used as a tool to uh, help people more than what we've done in the past.
So, tell us about some of the tools that Bit and Singleton used to get those positions that were going to be shelled by the Russians? What exists in Uranian astrology that helped them do this?
Well, what Vint did, I'll just show you my chart. What Vint did was he came up with a concept about how to get a closer look at the details of charts. Uh, so what he did was he decided to overlap space by creating a 90-degree chart, which is basically the cardinal signs, fixed signs, and mutable signs overlaid on each other, and the chart expanded to a round disk. This is also a technique used in Ebertein's cosmobiology, where a round disk is used. However, there are only the traditional planets and points involved.
What did you say the name of that person was?
Ebertein,
Ebertine.
Reinhold Ebertein, he
Reinhold
wrote
Ebertine.
Combination of Stellar Influences, which is an excellent, excellent book. Let me show you my books while we're talking about it. Here's Combination of Stellar Influences here. Reinhold Ebertine. Within that book are mathematical combinations of different planets, like, say, midpoints of things like Jupiter and Venus, and also three-part formulas Venus plus Jupiter minus some other planet like Saturn, with the delineations of what they are likely to express in the life of a native that has that in a significant location.
I see. So my understanding of Uranian astrology is that there are trans-Neptunian bodies which
Yes.
are used in these calculations. Let's hear more about those. Tell us about the trans-Neptunian bodies.
The Trans-Neptunians were discovered by analysis of hundreds, perhaps even thousands of charts during the uh, duration of the Hamburg School's existence. The Hamburg School, I think, was dissolved by Nazi Germany. Astrologers, actual astrologers that did not cooperate with the Nazi propaganda agenda were largely sent to the camps. And the Hamburg School was well aware of the dangers that the Nazi government represented to the future of Germany. Uranian planets that were discovered through charts by Witt and Segrin, the past investigation. Zeus, creativity, sexual procreation, work, machines, firearms, and Chronos, authorities, superiors, governments, uh, leaders. And the second four were discovered by Frederick Segrin and added. These are Apollon, glory, honor, business success, Admetos, rotation, standstill, separation, death, solidity, land, Volcanos, influential authority, adding strength and power and force, and finally Poseidon, which is the higher expression of Neptune, uh, high intellect, cognition, psychism, clairvoyance. It's also associated with mass media and linked to religion and ideology. These are then used in planetary formulas, which tell people about the native, such as the midpoint, Venus and Cupido on Aries. This is associated with art, marital happiness, happy marriage, a pleasant company, peaceful society or association. Now, if we went to a specific formula, such as Venus plus Cupido minus Jupiter,
What's the
which
software that you're using to do this, by the way?
this is Nova chart wheels.
Nova Chart Wheels. Okay.
hmm What this does when you type in formulas like this is it takes the midpoint and uses that as an axis. And the distance a planet is from that axis is the same measurement that makes the entire formula on the other side. In Rules for Planetary Pictures, which is what these definitions come from, we can easily look these up. I would recommend this book to anybody,
Well,
even vaguely interested in Uranian astrology.
what did you call the book
Or
again?
the book itself,
What is the name of the book and the author?
Rules for Planetary Pictures.
Rules.
This book
Okay. That's a Vid
is,
Liefeld book.
hmm and this one is very old. There is a new volume of this available through astrologers.com, which is the bookstore owned and website owned by American Federation of Astrologers. Most of their books are very inexpensive compared to uh, Amazon or some other uh, purveyors of astrology books. If we look this up, Venus plus Cupido minus Jupiter, great happiness in married life to be happy in pleasant company. There is another type of formula that also goes with both of these. You've got the midpoints are also available as sums. I'll give you an example of a sum, and that in this case is the same as Aries, but that has the same meaning as a midpoint. But if you did a midpoint plus another body, we use the same one as we did before. It comes up with a formula here, which is also related to Aries. That's very interesting. This particular formula is the same meaning as the Venus plus Cupido minus Jupiter, but it also registers in a chart in a different spot usually than the other formula. You see, these two are similar. They both count in charts as long as they register to a personal point by angle. Let me explain the personal points. Aries is what is known in the general world about the native. M is the called the most important point on the chart. It describes the native. It is the eye in the horoscope. The sun covers the physical body and has rulerships involving men, sometimes even a boss in a employment aspect. A, the ascendant has to do with other people. The moon has to do with women, the several persons, or infants, and the node has to do with your connections. The ascendant also has to do with your local environment. And the final point of the seven here is the vertex, which has been linked with fate or fated events. Anything that connects on dot, you can see the dots here, can't really see that one, but there's one in between these two and another one over here. I will expand this so we can see them better. Anything that is on the dot to the pointer, which is pointing at something, has to do with that person, such as we see here that the node is on dot to the sun, which implies physical connections of the native. Let's see if we can go with Aries, find something that's on dot to there. Not at this point. There will be formulas that show up that are on dot, and certainly within 2 degrees of the Aries point, any formula that comes up here will certainly apply to the native and his reputation in the general world.
So let's make sure that we're understanding here. We have Aries as a
Uh-huh.
point in a person's chart where zero Aries is at in their chart. It doesn't necessarily have to line up with the cusp of a house or another planet. It's just a place in a person's chart, zero Aries.
Right.
And we have zero Taurus and zero Gemini, right?
Huh? Yes.
And you're saying that if we take the big red pointer there
Mm-hmm.
and we point it at one of those points or one of the other points that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
let's point that arrow there. You have it pointing right there at your you had it
The
pointing at your moon just now.
right.
Okay. And so in let's see if there are any do you see any dots, any exact dots? I see one on your vertex, maybe.
Mm-hmm. One on the vertex. The small dots like that, the 16th dots, have an orb of about 10 to 12 arc minutes. This is very precise stuff compared to traditional work as far as formulas go.
Got you.
I'll give you a brief overview of the orbs. At the pointer here, there's an orb of 2 degrees. Opposite the pointer over here, there's an orb of 1 degree, plus or minus. At the squares, there's an orb of 30 arc minutes. Right there, both squares.
Which is what, half of 1 degree?
Yes. Here, we have an orb of about 20 arc minutes. This is the eighth, 1/8 dots. And here, on these little ones, there's an orb of about 10 to 12 minutes. And at these, which are usually denote trines or sextiles, you have an orb of about 20 arc minutes. And there is another one here that is shown on the ACS chart, but it's not really illustrated here. That's also 20 arc minutes. Notice that this formula, happy marriage and the ascendant of other people, is connected to the moon by midpoint. It's actually falls here in the opposition to the midpoint. This means that there is a very good likelihood of a happy marriage relationship with a woman in my life.
I see. So
With
you took the degree that was the result of the mathematical formula
uh-huh,
of Venus plus what's that symbol?
Cupido, Cupido,
Cupido. Venus plus Cupido minus Jupiter. And you put that point over
uh-huh,
there on your chart. Like that's where those degrees would add and subtract up to.
right.
And on the other side of the chart, you have that ascendant there, right?
Hmm.
And you took the halfway point between the degree of both of those things, right?
Right. You can
Eh,
see the line here showing that it's a midpoint. These connect
yes.
on
And
this axis.
and as a result, the number that you got was directly opposite your moon, right?
Right.
And if it is opposite, the orb has to be more precise than if it is conjunct, right?
That's correct.
It has to be actually there's half as much wiggle room for it
Right.
on the other side. So, would you say that having moon opposite this midpoint has led to an opposite outcome, or has it led to a same outcome? What would you say about
It's
its
led to
opposite?
the same outcome.
Got you.
I've experienced some significant marital happiness with other people. Now, because the moon is kind of associated with short periods of time, this can manifest, depending on the person involved, having marital happiness for a shorter duration than say a lifetime marriage might be.
See,
That's not always the case, but it can express that way. In my previous marriage, it expressed that way. Let's look at
before
Ed Gein's chart.
before we do
Let's
that, might
take
I just say that regarding that moon there, it might have to do with the condition of the moon just as a
could be.
as a consideration. Look at the condition. If anyone watching this ever does do want, can you put the chart back on the back
I can.
at the front? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
For anyone who engages in Uranian astrology, if you watch this video, get back to me and tell me any mathematical points, midpoints that are conjunct or opposite the moon. How have they played out for that person, and what is the condition of their moon? Like what dignity, its essential dignity, accidental dignity, aspects to it, things like that.
The Uranian level of astrology reinforces similar stuff going on in the traditional chart. And I try to insist to other people that you must use the traditional chart when you're doing Uranian formulas to pin down the meanings of the formulas because each formula involves these planets which have different rulerships, different possible expressions. So you can have a formula like Mars plus Saturn minus Vulcanos, which rules for planetary pictures says death in prison or confinement, period, and conflicts about competency. These are two possible expressions in the life of a native. Well, it also can mean other stuff. Hindrance of work that's very strong in the native's life. It can be mighty efforts in work with metals, sculpting, something having to do with Saturn. There's a lot of possibilities there. So using the traditional chart is one of the two ways of pinning down a formula. The other way is to view a very large constellation of these formulas and seeing what is reinforced. In this case, I can show you what I'm talking about. We have the solar fire chart of Ed Gein, a murderer during the early 1900s. This is the regular chart with the Uranians added and also some of the newer discovered planets like Sedna here. And in the Uranian dial chart, you have a whole bunch of midpoints and registering patterns that talk about murders. It talks about murders a lot. Now, you can do the traditional chart, and you'll come up with that same information as a possible interpretation of this chart. But when you're reading it out of a book about a formula, that has delineations that were written back in the 30s. I think my version of Rules for Planetary Pictures is copyrighted in 1928. So these formulas were written in 1928 or earlier, and you can read those and see in the life of a native that these delineations are valid in a great many cases.
The thing about astrology that I would encourage all people who are contributing to astrology to know is that one of the beauties of the universe is how when we think that we've got it all figured out, it throws us for a loop. And as a result, that's why sometimes we use different systems that come to the same accurate conclusions. The ultimate
Right.
goal of anybody in astrology should be to spread the truth and speak the truth and to
Yes.
work towards a greater understanding.
Yes. I agree.
So, with that in mind, we also have to understand again that the universe, being a chaotic body, likes to play tricks on us sometimes. And it isn't necessarily a matter of right and wrong, it's just a matter of perception in that moment.
Hmm. Understanding and insight of what's going on. You'll notice this chart is pointed at the MC, the eye in the chart.
From a Uranian perspective, that's their ego, their soul in a way, right?
Yeah, our next one is the general world. And you have all these charts for violence, like this one, Hades, Volcanos, that's a murder midpoint. And we have here the node Uranus sudden connections. When they found out that Ed Gein had done all this, of course, that was a sudden and exciting connection made to his activities. And we have over here.
Wait, just a second. Go back to that previous point. Go back to that previous midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
You said the intersection, the midpoint of the North Node and Uranus.
Uh-huh.
That one
This
there,
one,
yes, and that's the midpoint of Hades and Zeus, Volcanos,
Volcano.
Volcanos. That's
Yeah,
Hades and Volcanos,
right.
and we know that Hades is associated with all manner of unpleasant things and or possibly violent activity, and we know
Yes,
that.
in a chart. In a good chart, it can be associated with analysis and investigation. It's also associated with magic, occultism, secrets, and things like that.
So it's very
So,
scorpionic in nature.
yeah, it can manifest very positively in a good chart or very negatively in an unfortunate chart, such as this one.
Got you. So the point is that you took the big red pointer and you set it to zero Aries.
Hmm.
And being set to zero Aries, what does that represent?
Known to the general world.
What is known to the general world
Hmm.
about the other person?
About this native.
Yeah, about this native. Got you. Because Aries is like a person's assertion. It's like, hey, I'm here, I exist. It's the way a person comes out of the gate to other people, so to speak.
Yeah, well, it can also mean what is known to the general world or believed by the general world is not necessarily the true case.
Got you. How the
Um,
general world perceives this native.
right.
Okay. And so when you pointed it there,
Uh-huh.
we see here on the left side in this Aries zone. So
Uh-huh.
that would that say that in this zone over here that this is what is known about the general native
Yep.
to the world? Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
what is this in the Taurus zone? What does that represent? In the fixed zone?
You mean over here at
Yeah.
this beginning of the fixed signs?
No, I just mean like everything that is inside of the 90 degrees of the fixed area. Like,
Oh,
because you said that Aries is what's known to the general world, so I want to know what Taurus is.
I don't know, actually.
Okay.
I've thought about it as perhaps being something that is established since the fixed signs are very established and the mutable signs are very flexible. But that was not really focused on by the Uranian school that I have
Ooh.
seen.
So that is something. See, this is why I like asking the tough questions because
Hmm.
it really, uh, gives people an opportunity to go and look for something. You know, this is
Hmm.
I really love discovering things like this.
Yeah.
I just
Uh,
realized my camera's been all the way up there for the time being. That's better.
uh, well, anyway, you notice all these different things that are going on with Ed.
Yeah.
Some of these are on dots, and some of these are connected by midpoints. And there's a lot of stuff that I just looked up the definitions of through my book, Uranian Master Lexicon, and I can look for all kinds of different formulas by keyword. And if anybody wants this, they can send me an email at rmharris2018 at gmail.com and ask for it. Or if they're on Facebook, they can look me up there. But anyway, I compiled all these different sentences for the delineations in key to planetary pictures. And what I did was I just looked up keywords like death, murder, et cetera, and then I plotted these out and found that they match the sky. So I was very pleased to have that happen, and I have great confidence that that will also be happening with other criminal analysis charts. This points at where the sidereal Aries is, believe it or not, in relation to the tropical. So that also means that these in the 2-degree orb and in the 1-degree orb do count. Next, we have the sun of the man. There we go. It's within 2 degrees within orb. We have the formula death in prison or confinement, which connects to the physical body. And he dies in prison because he killed people.
That's the midpoint of Mars and Hades
Yeah.
minus Volcanos.
Nope. This is Mars plus Saturn minus
Mars
Vulcanos.
plus Saturn minus Volcanos. Okay.
And this is Mars midpoint Hades. So he was imprisoned and died in prison because he murdered some people. Those are right on top of each other in this 90 format. You can see another murder formula, which is also combined with M Hades, which talks about being secretive. He kept his activities secret. We have the environment over here, and we have the moon of women and various formulas connecting to women and what happened to them during Ed's life and activities. This is the node, his connections, and he is connected to death. You can see there. There's a whole lot going on in this chart, and I'm glad I did it because I was doing a post on Facebook, Find the Serial Killer Game, which is a test to give example of how important astrology is as an information tool.
I'll
Here,
include the link to that game in the video description.
great. And please include the link to my Facebook page as well, so people can look at my various astrological posts. They would probably enjoy that if they're watching this.
So ultimately, we would say that Uranian astrology, which is not very well known or frequently used through the astrological community at large, is a significant advanced way of gathering data about potential specific events and the
Mm-hmm.
nature and machinations or the experiences of people.
Mm-hmm. Here's the Mayfield tornado. I did a post on that.
Yeah, Mayfield, Kentucky suffered a huge, devastating tornado during what should have been winter, December 10th of 2021. That's just before the start of winter. That's late fall, right?
Yeah,
And it should be cold during that time,
yeah.
but tornadoes happen when hot air mixes with cold air and it constantly cycles up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it doing being that warm in the middle in late fall? Hmm.
That's a good point. I think that's related to global heating myself. Here is Jupiter midpoint Apollon. Uh, this is one of the things that delineates as many buildings. And this, Mars midpoint Volcanos, has to do with destruction. So destruction of many buildings is one example here. There's a lot of stuff in this chart, which I really didn't work enough on. Uh, this was previous to Ed Gein's investigation. Uh, but I did show enough to put a suggestion forward of the use of astrology like this for the National Weather Service to give people time, like say a week in advance, to know that a significant weather event is coming and to get out of the area that the chart shows is affected.
That sounds
Uh,
absolutely mythical. Having astrologers in the National Weather Service that can
yeah,
use predictive astrology to head off catastrophic events, I would love to see that. That would just make this world feel so much more magical.
yeah, and if you did charts for every place in the United States at a grid of like 5 miles, 1 mile, something like that, and did them for a series of times, you'd be able to see if you did a graphical representation of the like a collection of planetary pictures signifying weather events, destruction, and things like that, you would be able to see the path of a tornado through astrology, through computer aided charts given video representation.
Think
I
that that's
believe this
something
would
we're
be
going to
a,
have to put to the test.
oh, yes, I believe it would be a groundbreaking discovery and would revolutionize astrology and revolutionize a whole lot of stuff because you could potentially also apply it to fires and earthquakes
Yeah.
and tsunami
Any form
and
of natural disaster comprehensible.
as above, so below.
Yeah.
It's there, it's showing above. We just got to figure out how to see it. And I think we've come to the point where we can.
So
Just takes a little bit more work.
back on the Mayfield tornado, though, you said that we have the midpoint here of Jupiter and Apollon, which means
Uh-huh.
many buildings. What
Uh-huh.
what other formulas present on this chart indicate imminent natural disaster? Definitely have
Yeah,
to be some
definitely.
involving Uranus, doesn't it?
Yeah. Let's look at some of those Uranus things. Uh, oh, this is a nice one. Moon, Neptune, and Uranus.
Events that happen at night, right?
Right.
Moon
That's
plus
exactly what
Neptune.
that is. And
uh,
it's connected to the night because you see the node. So you've got here, which is opposite Aries, and also connected to the MC, which is very close. That's awesome. Uh, Neptune, let's midpoint Hades. Let's see if we can find that. Damages through error, deception, decay, water catastrophes, lack of air. I would say that also means storms when you're reading for atmospheric stuff. Let's look at Moon Hades and see what that says.
you definitely caught my attention with that National Weather Service consideration
Yeah,
with the
that's a dream of mine. It really is. Uh, Hours full of worry and anguish, hour of ordeal by fate. Since the moon also represents the public, this would also indicate a serious situation involving a population. Let's look at some more. Okay, here we go. Jupiter plus Saturn minus Cupido. That represents a community because Jupiter and Saturn are buildings, and Cupido would represent a settlement or a collection of buildings. Let's see what else we got. Mars, Neptune plus Volcanos. Great destruction.
and Jupiter. We know that Jupiter expands and makes larger whatever it touches.
It
So
amplifies.
yeah, so
So the destruction of the whole town makes sense. Plus, look at this. It's a midpoint with Volcanos over here as well. So Jupiter Volcanos is a huge deal. And it also shows Poseidon at the bottom opposite Aries, which means a whole lot of video and media display of this tremendous amount of destruction that's going on. Let's see what else we got going here in this
you
chart.
know what I'm thinking? If you
What's
go
that?
back to the previous chart with the Taurus with
Uh-huh.
with the pointed yeah back yeah. What I'm thinking is that so whereas the Aries zone is things that are known to the general world, the Taurus zone, if the formula signification in there is a good one, it can
Hmm.
indicate potentially gains to the possessions of the object or person in question, and if bad, it can represent significant ruin or disaster to possessions.
Hmm.
That's just we're doing the detective work here. We're discovering what it's all about. So that's my first guess at what that is.
Yeah, that's very possible. In order to examine that, what I would suggest is doing the 360-degree dial and pointing that to Taurus and seeing what's going on there with formulas that directly hit on that. I wish I had done that previously to this, but I did not anticipate your asking that question. But it's a very excellent question. I
Yeah.
like it.
That's one thing that you will have to be prepared for if you come on my show
That's
because
not a problem.
I I, I'm telling this to the viewers as well because I like seeing people who can think quickly on their feet and if they don't have an answer, at least be graceful and poised about it.
Yeah, I don't mind saying I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that yet. I don't understand that yet. We're working on
Hey,
it.
that's the makings of
And
a great astrologer, you know.
I try very hard, sir. I sure do. We have A here, the ascendant, which has to do with the local area. The M midpoint Mars is on there. I tracked that formula twice. I shouldn't have typed it in twice. I guess I forgot. Plus, you have within that 2-degree area, you have the formula Uranus plus Zeus minus Hades. Let's look at that one and see what that says. Doesn't look like it's going to say anything positive right there because that looks pretty unpleasant. But
Uranus
we shall
plus
see.
Uranus plus Zeus minus Hades.
Mhm. In
Yeah.
the orb of the area of the environment, local environment of that place. Here we go. Forces bringing destruction. Destruction through power of nature. Thunder showers, storms at sea, earthquakes, eruption of volcanoes. Yep. Another thing that seems to suggest a hell of a storm hitting that location.
Yeah, it seems that whenever Uranus is involved, especially when Uranus is involved with a, if you will bear with me as I say this, a Uranian malefic, that
Mhm,
usually indicates some sort of sharp and sudden destruction that often involves air or electricity because Uranus
mhm.
in the modern association is ruled by Aquarius, and I like to think of Aquarius as a cloud because it's directly opposite the sun. It blocks out the sun or dims the light of the sun, so to speak, and clouds are known to contain both water and electricity.
Yeah, it seems to be very strong in Aquarius.
Yeah.
Sure does.
So what you're saying is there were plenty of points at the time indicating that there was an impending disaster that was about to happen for the people of Mayfield,
Uh-huh.
and if perhaps there was time taken or a machine had done some calculations of some sort, it would have been known that this tornado was going to happen and perhaps the town could have been evacuated in advance.
Yes. What the National Weather Service might receive as a message is there is a strong probability that significant destruction would occur in the longitude and latitude geolocation of Mayfield, Kentucky.
And this is all done with very precise calculations.
Yeah.
So this is not some woo-woo type of thing. This is science applied to something that most people consider right now to not be particularly scientific. But if they
Right.
went and explored it, they might see that there is actually more science and precision to it than they initially thought.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I
Mark,
mean, you got this book written with these delineations in 1928, and you do these calculations and then compare them, the delineations of those, to something that's actually happening at the time that this chart is drawn up from, which in this case is 9:27 p.m. on December 10th, 2021. And you see a picture drawn of what happened in Mayfield, Kentucky through astrological symbols. So it's very compelling, and I would think that this would move in the direction of empirical verification of astrology in a different way. Empiricism usually breaks down everything to single factors. You can verify that this one thing is significant and stuff. Well, Uranian works as constellations of factors. So it's a little bit more difficult to do, but it's not impossible to approach some kind of verification that the government would grudgingly accept for use by such agencies as the National Weather Service and the Oceanic Survey and some of those other places.
Well, hopefully in the future we will see that added. That is all the time that we have for today. I thank you so very much for coming on and showing us this Uranian astrology.
This is delightful. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for inviting me.
All right. Thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you next week.